early adulthood as a stage has been largely ignored in our culture. Yet many young adults today fail to see meaning in old expectations of finding work and establishing a family. Our guest today is Satya Doyle Byock, who will talk about the quarterlife crisis and individuation in early adulthood. Also, the Red Book, the Salome Institute for Jungian Studies, and much more. I am your host, Katherine Bell of Experiential Dreamwork, and welcome to the Dream Journal. A dream can be meaningful even if you don't know what it means. So talk about dreams that I don't know what they mean. I recently had a dream of falling. I don't have a lot of those dreams. I know some people have many. I'm in a room with my husband and one other person, and I just feel this incredible falling sensation in the pit of my stomach. It's this kind of movement, like falling. And there's something about, I don't know. And then we're talking about how do we best get ready for the impact? Do we stand? Do we lie down? You know, kind of that old question, what's the best way if your elevator's falling? What do you do? And there's a couch there, and I get Max up on the couch, and then I wake up. So I never really hit the bottom. I don't know what happened. But for me, as I feel into that sensation of that, just letting go, the falling, there's like a sense of surrender, a sense of being in the moment and just being with what is. When something's so huge as falling from the sky, then you got to just go with the present because that's all you got. All right, let's meet our guest, Satya Byock. Am I saying your name right? Please help me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here, Katherine. I pronounce my name Satya Doyle Byock. You did very well. It's a complicated name. It is not an easy name for anyone. Thank you for having me here.
Great. And would you like to introduce yourself? What else would you like to say about it?
Sure. Well, no, I think you did a wonderful job. We're talking about Quarterlife today. I wrote a book called Quarterlife, The Search for Self in Early Adulthood. That came out now 4 years ago, and I'm excited that we get to explore those topics today. I wrote that book really to provide more soulful psychology for people in their 20s and 30s primarily, but I've had readers into their 80s and 90s who have found value in it because it's really about finding meaning and stability in adulthood. It really offers information for all of adulthood and draws on Jungian psychology. And again, just being present with the soul, the conscious self and the unconscious self at the same time.
I love that.
And I also run this year-round program in Jungian psychology at the Salome Institute of Jungian Studies, where we're studying all sorts of stuff. We study Jung's Red Book, you mentioned that, which we can maybe talk about today if you have interest, and Dreamwork and all the rest. So
okay. And your webpage is satyabyock.com. Byock is B-Y-O-C-K, satyabyock.com. And then you have the fabulous Substack, also called satyadoylebyock.substack.com, which is pretty exciting. You can find out all about Satya there. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about this, partly because, you know, when it comes to dreams, it's almost a running joke that our demographic is older people. And that we have, like for the conferences and in my groups and the people I work with, there's a pretty solid base of people older in life who are interested in their dreams. And yet there's also this persistent demographic of young people who are trying to make meaning out of this crazy place that they are coming into adulthood in. And, you know, Carl Jung didn't really have much to say about this time of life. It's like instincts will lead the young person into life. Well, maybe, you know, but
no,
maybe they won't.
Yeah, this is really the genesis of my book. And I spent probably 15 years thinking about it, researching it, writing articles on it, and then publishing my book. And the reason is I was a young person interested in dreams, joining those dream groups with mostly people many decades older than me, and attending Jungian lectures and looking around and wondering, you know, where was everyone? But part of what I discovered was a lot of, especially Jungian lectures and more of those spaces that I'm very comfortable in now, but they're often speaking about what Jung termed the second half of life.
Right.
And for Jung, this was the developmental stage after, kind of the midlife crisis. He didn't always use that term, but this understanding that a major change was happening for Jung and many people around him in around the 35th, 40th, 45th year. So he really spent a lot of time on the second half of life. But what I have really deeply come to understand is that that kind of transformative crisis can happen at any time in adulthood. For some people, it doesn't come until they're 75. For some people, it's coming, starting around 16 even. And it's really a crisis of saying, okay, stability values, what I call stability values, structure, safety, security, those aren't providing me the sense of meaning I actually am searching for. And so people begin to wonder, is there more? They look around and they wonder, is there more? And in a world in pretty continuous crisis, I think that's happening for young people very early.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Right. And stability is, elusive at best. Are we going to find any stability? Because, there's this expectation or this kind of traditional view where people are going to go to college, they're going to get a job, they start a family and get all that stability. But you also talk about there's like another path that is becoming more common among young people today. And why don't you say some more about that?
Yeah, so as I was diving into this material and trying to make sense of how the developmental stages across developmental psychology had really been established, it became clear that primarily what was being focused on were people who were kind of succeeding in external society, people who could accomplish college, job, career, promotions, a 401k, the white picket fence, all of that. There was sort of this assumption in a lot of developmental psychology that that's the goal. And I began to really see, well, look, this is the goal from capitalism's perspective. It's the goal from maybe even, citizenship on a certain level, although I really think it's more tied to the economy than about being a citizen. But meanwhile, again, there's the inner life and there's the soul. And what about the inner life of a person who wants to understand more about existence? How does that get woven in? That was in more traditional human societies part of all development. And it's been really stripped out from ours. And so I began to weave that back in and understand that people tend to start adulthood either as what I call stability types, which is largely what you just spoke about, the stability types, or there's people who are starting adulthood as meaning types. And meaning types tend to flounder much more with those expectations of adult goals and the, the wayposts of adulthood. Meaning types don't really feel organically oriented to them. And so we need to find ways to support people who are really deeply oriented towards meaning to actually then move towards stability goals and bring those two selves together. But meanwhile, stability types need to know that the questions of meaning are coming for them at some point. They're coming.
Right. Well, for me, they kind of hit in my 30s, and I was very much did what the family tradition was: go to school, go to grad school, go to get a PhD, and then I even got hired by NASA. And I got there, and I got the dream job, and I hated it. It was like didn't mean anything to me. It was like what am I doing here? And so that kind of hit me pretty hard at about 30. And it was like that was like the crisis that kind of broke my life open. And so it's interesting that you talk about these crises. So in some ways, I guess I was a stability type, and then I found that the meaning beat down my door and was like, okay, but wait a minute, what about meaning? And so do you think that it's more common these days to have these meaning type people who are aware of the meaning earlier than it used to be? Because I mean, it's been over 100 years since Carl Jung did his work.
Yeah.
And culturally, we've evolved quite a bit, I'm sure.
Well, we've evolved and devolved, I would
Ooh.
say. I mean, in the sense that, Jung was writing his work on the stages of life between World War I and World War II. We've had many wars since then. We're in the middle of several wars now, and economic crises and social crises. I think people coming of age now, the disorder of society is self-evident.
Mhm.
for the very vast majority, whether you're on the right or the left, there's a pretty clear sense and agreement of society not working the way it should and values not being oriented the way they should be oriented. So I actually think the majority of people coming up now are feeling a lot of these questions of meaning. And then the question is, what do they do with it? You know, do they seek to sort of batten down the hatches and engage explicitly in security and survival and stability? That is a defense system, and it's a direction that many people will go, but others will go deeper into the questioning and more into activism and artistry and philosophy and more the humanities in that respect. And but at the end of the day, I think, to your point, some years go by, both sides will ultimately need to find what the other finds.
Mhm.
And that's really kind of the core thesis of my book, is we all need stability and meaning. We just start looking for those things at different times in different ways.
Right, right. There does seem to be, like, of the young people in my life, which I seem to have quite a few, through my son and my husband's children and that sort of thing, that there is a lot of alternative ways of finding their ways through the world. It
Yeah,
isn't all traditional
right.
college and then long-term job, and there's other ways of being in the world. And as you point out, capitalism is something that is not been kind to our planet. And this is, capitalism is a big thing in the US. It's very dominant. And so maybe there's something new that's being dreamed up by the young people. I hope so.
Well, I certainly hope so too. Though I hate putting it on their shoulders. I think it's all of our responsibility to sort this out. And I do think being present with the unconscious, the work you're doing, Katherine, being present with dreams, being present with what the soul is actually expressing, is a very important antidote to this cultural slide towards extreme extroversion, extreme orientations, again, towards capitalist values, white supremacist values, patriarchal values. None of these things are about a world in balance.
Yeah.
And bringing the inner world back into conversation helps rebalance the world.
So let's talk about dreams. Like, so you talked about the dreams as the way to access the unconscious, and that's certainly been my experience. So they bring me things that are important that wasn't aware of, and yet when the dream brings up something that I recognize, I have a aha, and so I know there's something important. So it helps move me along much more quickly than my conscious mind could. And what about dreams of young people? You're a psychotherapist and you've worked with a lot of people. Do you find that meaning types, stability types have different kinds of dreams? Or what are people dreaming about these days?
Well, dreams are ancient, right? You
Yes.
dreams are timeless. And so I think, quite remarkably, people can be having dreams now that are extremely similar to dreams from hundreds of years ago. I also, I think what's quite interesting is that uh, dreams are not tied so much, in my experience, to biological age, but sort of the age of consciousness of a person,
Yes. That sounds
right?
right.
So I find it very interesting. A lot of work that Jung did when he would have very, very young patients, or the children of patients, come in who had a terminal diagnosis, some children with terminal cancer, for instance. They would be having dreams of a dying person. They would be having dreams of a person at the end of their life, even though they were 7 or 12 years old, right?
Right.
So I see that. I see that with people of any age. It depends on where their consciousness is developmentally, not so much their biological age.
That makes sense.
Um, but I think for stability types, dreaming is less accessible. It feels less available often, and often more frightening for people who are really oriented towards the external world and stability goals. They might have dreams more of feeling lost or trapped, or dreams like falling or flying, where they're sort of trying to find ground in a certain way, because in a way, like, their ego is so fixed to the external world, their soul doesn't have anything to hold on to.
Yeah. Totally. I used to have dreams about being a big, huge castle and being alone in this castle. And it was like I was so defended. I was like really safe, but it was freaking cold.
Yeah.
And there was nobody there. And so, like, these kind of dreams were some of the ones that really woke me up to to like my actual condition, my predicament in life.
Right.
This is
The
where,
lonely fortress. You were all
yeah.
alone in this incredible fortress. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that that's kind of a stability type dream. You know, it's very well defended, well protected. I talk in my book, one of the analogies I use or the images I use is the need for a very strong, sturdy, well built fireplace with a very good fire burning inside of it. And for stability types, they often have the fireplace, but no fire. And that's really, to me, speaks to your dream.
Yes.
And meaning types will often have a burning fire, but it's in danger of burning out of control because there's not the human made structure for all that organic energy.
Okay. Interesting, because that goes to my question about like the dreams of meaning types. So you have the there where the fire, but there's no container. There's no receptacle like a hearth.
Right, right. Yeah, I think, meaning types, I mean, these are generalizations inevitably, but I think meaning types are more likely to be having quite archetypal, powerful, complicated dreams. But there's not a sense of the containment or almost the mundane, the human mundane, just the fireplace, right?
Yeah.
It's more the forest fire. And again, for stability types, it's more kind of mundane, a sense of being dried up, bored, but despite what may be happening, they might externally be thriving, sort of, but internally something has really dried up.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going through my dreams. I can really relate to that. I had a lot of forest fire dreams where buildings are being burned down, like my structure was being burned down, and it was helpful
Wow.
to like get that structure was just too intense for me, and so interesting. And whereas someone who is more in the meaning type might have to find some kind of a container.
Well, that's right. But I think what you're just expressing, my guess is that's when some transition was really happening for you, that the organic quality of psyche was now starting to take over the human built structures. And so transition, I don't know what with divorce, major crisis, that feels like more of those kinds of dreams.
Totally. Yeah. And it's just like another example of the idea that nightmares are helpful and they're a sign of something helpful going on. There may be change, it may be catastrophic change, it may be humongous change, and yet that change we're ready for the change. It's time for that change.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Nightmares, I try to always say this, come in many different flavors. There are some nightmares that are repetitions of real trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder. And in that case, when the psyche has actually, Jung speaks about it as sort of the metabolizing function of psyche has been broken actually at that point. That the physiological system, we now know so much more about what's happening with the body with severe trauma, that the ability to metabolize events actually can rupture because the body and psyche gets so saturated, and that needs to then be healed in order for the nightmares to be transformed and to go away. We work with those kinds of nightmares quite differently, but generally speaking, the nightmares that I think the majority of people are having are often shadow dreams. It's deep fears that the ego is having of being disrupted in some way, but it's not bad for the whole self, and we have to separate with those two truths.
Okay. Well, while we're talking about crisis, that kind of leads me to the idea of the Red Book, which is, Red Book. Well, why don't you introduce the Red Book? But that's all about
Sure.
Carl Jung's crisis, is what I was.
Yes, exactly. No, it's all on theme. So I'll do my best to keep this short because I could talk about it for a very long time. But Jung's Red Book is really the foundation of his entire psychology, except it wasn't actually published until 2010 or 2009. And it came out at that point when, after it had been in a Swiss bank vault for 60 years and was then edited and translated and all this. So it's actually a quite new document for us to be exploring and learning from. It's very complicated, but it came out of Jung's experience of beginning to have very significant disorientation, what seemed almost to him as though he was losing his mind, quote unquote, developing psychosis. But he later came to understand some of that was precognition for World War I, which started many months after these initial visions began. So he had this huge inner crisis that was due to a lot of the external structures of his life falling apart, but it was also in anticipation of a massive global crisis. So he started to kind of respect this precognition and this journey that his psyche was on, and recorded the stories that came from that. He started what he called active imagination, and this kind of intentional. It's sort of like a psychedelic trip without psychedelics. Really dropping his conscious mind deep into the archetypal unconscious and recording what unfolded from there.
Right. And that's where the Salome comes from in the Salome Institute, right? Because Salome is one of the main characters of the Red Book. This young is a young woman, I believe, or
That's right,
yeah.
exactly. Yes. So that's the name of my institute, the Salome Institute of Jungian Studies. I named it after the soul figure, the anima figure in Jung's Red Book, Salome.
Okay. So it's interesting that this book, which is so foundational to Carl Jung's work, uh, was not even published until many, many years after his death. And so, what can we learn from the Red Book? Can we go through the same kind of process that he went through? Because he basically, my understanding is that he went through a kind of a breakdown where he withdrew from public life for several years, I think, and did this really intensive inner work, which involved a lot of art as well as these inner explorations of active imagination. And then when he reemerged, he had changed the way that he worked with people. I understand.
Yes, he had transformed greatly himself. I wouldn't say, I don't think anyone wants to go on a Red Book journey. It was he felt that it almost killed him. It was a very, very, very deep crisis that he was sort of almost like hanging on to the edge of a ship, trying not to drown as he's being dragged along. This was not an easy experience, or at the time, an artful experience. He was just doing his best, essentially, to maintain sanity while it was unfolding. But what came from that, this tremendous alchemical transformation, was really the entire psychology that we now understand as analytical psychology or Jungian psychology. He came to very deeply understand what he called the reality of psyche. That this other layer that you work with, Katherine, this dream layer, that this is also real. It's not real to people deeply rooted in stability culture, external values and all that. It's not real to them. That doesn't mean it's not real. It's just a question of, what we perceive or not. It's not unlike, early science of not believing there's germs or thinking this is, witchcraft or something. And it turns out, no, they're just invisible to the naked eye, but they're real. They're right there. So he worked on uncovering a lot of this and left, a trove of information and writing and lecturing and students for all of us to continue learning from.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. So I guess I'll go ahead and ask. Well, this is a question I got from social media, and then we'll just touch into it, and then we'll take the break, and then we'll go more deeply into it. But the idea is that what can we learn from his trials? Like if he was being dragged along the boat, like
Yeah.
how do we learn to get on the boat and like to make it
Right.
easier for ourselves to travel the journey of really integrating these different parts of ourselves? Because it sounds like he was a stability type and then was overwhelmed with meaning, and then he was able to integrate the two.
Right. Yes. I mean, I think Jung had rooted very, very deeply into stability values as he was trying to build a career that was meaningful to him. I think like you weren't, I mean, NASA, I imagine, and that dream was very deeply tied to your sense of meaning at the time,
Yes.
right? These aren't extremely separate things often. But yes, he was climbing all the ladders of success and social expectation for a European academic man at that time of his life. I think that the largest lesson really is that the soul exists. Mm. And when we are in external crisis, to attempt to start turning our eyes inward and say, what's going on the subterranean level of this crisis? What does the soul want? What does my psyche want? What is happening with these inner figures? What's happening on that other layer of self that might be quite generative and life-saving and life-changing. You know, Jung would not be Jung without that journey. And so it's that alchemy, what we think of as a crisis or kind of almost a near-death encounter, can actually be the beginning of the most generative time of our lives.
Right. Time of the going through the desert. Sometimes
Right,
I've heard it called
exactly.
going through the desert, and we need to like recognize what's missing. And it's very
Exactly.
painful to recognize what's missing from our lives.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And these are stories that we hear not from, again, the goals of external cultural expectations, but the stories of the mystics, the stories of the theologians, the stories of philosophers and artists. We start to then hear, oh, that's what they know. That's
Mhm.
not what capitalism teaches us. It's not what patriarchy teaches us, but it is what others have known forever
Mm.
about what existence is actually for. It's not actually for the 401k. That's supposed to support something else. We need these things because we live in these systems. We need money to survive. We need money to feel safe and secure. But if we think it's the end goal,
Mhm.
we find ourselves in big trouble. And the
Right.
people around us may even start distancing from us if we don't encounter that struggle, because something is missing and there's a missed connection. And that's what this body of work really helps to inform us.
Love that. Thank you so much. This is Satya Doyle Byock, and we are talking about the Quarterlife Crisis, the Red Book, Salome Institute, and so much more. Satya's webpage is satyadoylebyock.com. You can also find her on Substack, satyadoylebyock.substack.com. And we're going to get into the deep stuff after the break, so please stay tuned. Next week, our guest will be Dr. Karen Vishny of Natural Dreamwork, who will be talking about dreams and the alchemy of presence. The Dream Journal is broadcast live from the KSQD studios in Santa Cruz and co-broadcast live in San Jose by KCXU and also up at KOWS in Sonoma. We are podcast everywhere on the Monday after the show. Full-length videos of the conversation can be found on Spotify and also on my YouTube page at Experiential Dreamwork. This is the Dream Journal, and I am Katherine Bell of Experiential Dreamwork. And thank you for your generous ratings and reviews for the pod and for sharing episodes on your social media. To help us spread interest in dreaming, follow us by looking for hashtag the Dream Journal and at Experiential Dreamwork on your favorite social media. But most importantly, consider telling your friends about the show. You might just find your next dream sharing buddy. Okay, so the guest today is Satya Byock of the Salome Institute, and we are talking about the Quarterlife Crisis, the Red Book, Carl Jung, and so much more. And as we do have Max here in the room with a question. Let's see. Let me hand you the microphone.
Hello, Katya. Did you come up with Satya, sorry. Did you come up with the term quarter life crisis? Because it seems like it's very, very, very intuitive and it's very good for today. I have two sons who are going through them right now.
Thank you. Hi, good to meet you. I did not. And the quarter life crisis is a term that was around when I was coming out of college myself. I was hearing there was a song, John Mayer has a song called The Quarter Life Crisis. There's a couple of books written about it. And so it was this term that was around in culture, kind of in the background, that I was very aware of and curious about. But I didn't really have a great sense of what it meant, other than a lot of people my age are in some kind of crisis. It was sort of an acknowledgement of that. What I have done with the term, and I actually myself rarely use the term quarter life crisis. I use quarter life itself as a developmental stage. And that's really more of my original work on this, is using this as its own developmental stage, much like people speak about both the midlife crisis and midlife separately. What I really try to emphasize is quarter life as its own developmental stage, as the first part of adulthood. It's a stage of life that has gone very under explored and under respected. It's kind of the stage of life that everyone is like, does that, it's the aunts and uncles who kind of wave their hand and they say, you'll figure it out. Oh, you'll figure it out. You'll figure it out. There's a lot of that assumption. And a lot of people on the other side of that, the younger people, really don't know if they're going to figure it out. And the truth is that some people don't. There's addiction, there's suicide, there's an enormous amount of suffering. And if the economy is not in a great place, there's not a lot of clarity for what young people are supposed to do. And really their job, as far as they've been told, is to align in some successful way with the economy and, and take it off like a rocket ship. If that's not working, there's not a lot of guidance. And so that's where my work has focused, is that stage of life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That makes sense. Do you have any observations, Max?
Yeah. I think that's very important to treat it not like a crisis, but like a stage. That's very good. I think I have several people, pardon me, I got something in my throat. Okay. I think I know several people are going through them at a fairly late age. Like I have one friend who's going through it about 40. Mm-hmm. And I think myself, I went through it. So it's been around for a long time. I think it's very pertinent that people are finally recognizing it.
Well, and this might be more traditionally called the midlife crisis, right? But I see them as extremely linked, and that it is really this orientation away from stability values towards a deeper sense of who am I? What is truly important in my life? Do I have genuine close friendships and romantic partners or partner singular? Do I feel loved? Do I know what love is? These kinds of things become incredibly important when a person is in serious crisis. But they're not necessarily what is kind of trained into us for adulthood values.
I think that's a great distinction, that this crisis really is a crisis of meaning, or stability. It's a crisis of bringing out our lives together. Could happen at any age, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Children
who are diagnosed with cancer can go through crisis or can go through this kind of change, even as a child.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Yes.
So we have a caller, Kelly, on line 1. Why don't you go ahead and put her through, Rick? Hi, Kelly. You there?
Yes. Enjoying the show.
Oh, good. Thanks so much for calling in. What can we do for you?
This is maybe on the meaning side of a Jung, but I don't know. Historically, I've been having conversations with friends of mine, and I know that Jung wrote a short piece on UFO mandalas, and there's been a lot in the news in the last few years about so-called UFO disclosure. And I wondered if this is anything that is a meaningful part of the psyche, or if it's just more, cognitive dissonance from the government.
Well, Kelly, this is a topic that I've been really exploring a lot lately. So it makes me smile that you're calling in about this. I think it's a left turn from what we've been talking about. I wouldn't say it fits in directly, but I'm very.
It's okay. It's a fair game.
Yeah.
And it's a great synchronicity. That is something you've been exploring yourself, Satya.
Yeah, no, it's really fun. It's a very interesting topic to me. I think Jung's thesis of that, those were some of the last pieces of writing he did in his life. And what he was really trying to articulate it was pretty vague and complicated the way he laid it out, but he said something is happening. Something is happening. People are seeing something. That's true. But we don't know what it is that they're seeing. And to complicate it further, he says we don't know if it's sort of a psychic projection that's actually happening, or if it's actually something in the external world, right? So this is how Jung makes sense of things. He's saying we are seeing something. People are seeing something. It's very consistent. They're always circular. And what he was trying to understand, and I think, Kelly, you mentioned this with the mandala image, he wondered if this was a projection of self in some way, a projection of the kind of God image into the world, a new image of a self figure.
To take it a little further, I've been actually studying this for probably since I was a child, because I was interested in it. And a lot of the what's coming forth now, like just to give an example of something more solid, a fellow named Robert Bigelow, who ran a program with the government on UAP, so to speak. And he recently, I guess in February, had an audience with President Trump, and he brought in cartloads of documentation that he'd collected during his 3 years of research, substantiating the physical reality of the UFO experience, and laid them out on the president's desk, evidently for 4 hours, gave him information he didn't have access to. And of course, we've heard nothing back from the White House afterwards. But there is evidence for a physical side, not just a psychic side. And I wondered, if there, what is the connection? If there is the physical side, are we manifesting something psychically, or is there just the two components here?
Well, I think that's the issue is not that nobody knows. Some people may certainly know. I think there's a lot of people who have been a part of these government programs who are speaking out much more publicly. I mean, to me, what's fascinating about this. There was a 60-minute program for an hour with these folks. There's another man named Luis. I want to say Luis Elizondo, I think, was the feature of that 60 Minutes episode. He wrote a book called Imminent, all about the work he was doing at the Pentagon on UAPs, on aerial phenomenon. The issue is that we are kind of in a place of trying to make sense of this from the collective. I think there is information, but nobody, again, collectively, we don't know what to make of it. And I'm not going to speculate at the moment on what's really going on, Kelly. I think it sounds like you've got thoughts on it. You've been researching this for a long time.
Well, the psychic part of it is really the non-human intelligence is what the term is that's used a lot, and that we are actually encountering another species, and it's coming up in dreams and in visions and so on. And there's it's hard to pick through it. Just when somebody like Lou Elizondo from putting out a counterintelligence spin on it, he's been pretty well debunked in the community as a fake. But there's all this false information being put out there because they don't want people really to do the internal investigation about what's going on, I think.
Well, Kelly, I'm not sure what you've read, but I would read Luis's book because I think he's on your team here. And this
okay.
and this question of debunking, this is the issue. I mean, this is the issue with psyche and with strange phenomena that we can't explain. It's always a question of truth or not truth. So I'm going to hold the tension. That's my job as a Jungian in my mind is hold the tension, and not jump to any conclusions one way or the other.
Well, thank you for your response.
All right. Thanks for calling, Kelly. Take care. Yeah. I mean, the psyche, like I've thought a lot about that our perspectives are so trained into us by our history, like that we may be missing like large swaths of reality that we just don't expect to see. And I think there are some people.
Yeah, no, I love that exactly, that the way you name that. I think that's really what I take from that caller too. And I think it's interesting to call in with this program of Dreamwork is just making sense of this larger reality. That's a term that Ursula Le Guin used, the speculative fiction author, this idea of how do we make sense of this larger reality than the often quite narrow reality that we're expected to participate in.
Right. Well, it's actually been a theme on the Dream Journal lately, the last 3 or 4 guests, where we've gotten into the idea that that we build our own realities in very real ways, and so that we then interact with people who see our reality the same way we do, and so that that's where these bubbles come from, and these kind of way we silo ourselves off from other people because we really see reality in different ways.
That's right. It's profound. I mean, and we get into the fabric of space-time. And I mean, I love that you have this background in, is it astrophysicist?
Yep. Astrophysics.
Yeah. So how does that inform your understanding of this?
Well, I think that there's just many different ways to look at things, and that that we build consensus as we go. Like the way science works is that you have tests, you make a hypothesis, you run some tests, and you see if that's confirmed or not. And then other people run tests. And so you get this consensus reality of what is true. But there's a well-known saying that progress occurs one funeral at a time, and that people have certain ways of looking at reality that they just hold for their whole lives. But the young people coming up may have different ideas of how to look at things, but the older people they're established, they might hold back the younger people, which kind of goes back to our topic here. But there's something about I just lost my train of thought. There's something about this idea of what is actually real.
Yeah.
That becomes a question.
I just yesterday morning at the Salome Institute, where I run this year-round program in Jungian psychology, I gave a lecture on synchronicity. It's part of what I call our foundation series. So we do monthly lectures on the foundations of Jungian psychology. And this topic of synchronicity, I think, is part of this as well, which is what Jung really understood this to be, is this sort of co-occurring way that events are linked when they are not causally connected.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a causal events. And it's sort of impossible to explain on some level to Western science that is really oriented towards the causal relationship between events. But if, for instance, you have a dream of somebody dying and you wake up the next morning and you get a phone call that somebody has passed away, we know that these things, you didn't dream of, your dream didn't kill the person, right? And there's no way to causally understand those two events being related. We don't understand how that inner experience and the outer experience are connected to one another. I do think this goes back to what the caller was asking, is how are inner events and outer events connected, if not by cause? And this is this term synchronicity. And for Jung, synchronicity was sort of tied to the singularity, the idea of singularities in quantum physics, where you don't know how this one singular creation came into existence, but it did nonetheless come into existence. Right.
And we don't need to understand everything for it to be true.
Exactly.
And the thought that escaped me, I got it back, which had to do with capitalism, that we have this collective delusion that this is the only way to do business. And I just, for me, it's 99% of my consciousness is this is how it works, the market and buying and selling. And yet there's I only just have the barest idea that something else is possible. And so we have this whole cultural delusion, if you like, or agreement. We agree that this is how it's going to be. And yet there are so many other ways that it could be. And this whole idea of the UAPs, that we have this idea of, that's not real. It's just this phenomenon. And yet maybe there's a little bit of truth there too. And it may open up to something much larger. And the whole thing of telepathy and precognition and a lot of the psychic phenomenon and just consciousness, the idea that consciousness predates matter, could really revolutionize the way that we are as a human species. And so some people think of what's happening right now in the world and the different crises that are going on in the world is the world going through kind of a transformative nightmare where we have we're learning how we are, and that wake us up to moving forward and learning something new.
No, I think that's really true. And I do think of this as, on some level, this crisis of a stability culture, right? An entire culture. And colonialism basically has spread through the entire world, right? It's got its tentacles in almost everything. So on some level, we're all part of this collective delusion, whether we want to be a part of it or not, of infinite growth, right? Of whatever capitalism teaches us or consumption teaches us, we're learning very rapidly there are in fact limits. And we're coming up against those limits. And I do think that's very similar to what Jung was experiencing in advance of the Red Book, which is the individual psyche or the collective psyche at some point is going to fall out of the delusion that you can simply climb upwards. At some point, you have to go downwards. And that's not, to your point, Katherine, in itself a bad thing. Mm-hmm. It can be the way that we are waking up more towards balance and away from just, the climb.
Right. Maybe as a culture, we're discovering more about meaning. but it can be painful. These kind of transitions, like I know my transition from astrophysicist to dream coaches was quite painful. It was like really.
Oh, it's an ego. It's a total death of all the conscious self, of what the conscious self knows, or what society believes that it should be or is. I think it's almost inevitably painful, not just that it can be. It's a deeply difficult time. It's hard to climb to the top of a mountain and realize you're on the wrong mountain, or you shouldn't have climbed at all.
Yeah, okay. That's great. But should strong. Like, so we did that mountain for a while, but like, let's find a better mountain where we can like have a more sustainable future and be more cooperative with all these billions of humans on the planet. I think
and the animals and the rivers and the oceans. Yeah.
Yes to that for sure. It's super important. So Satya, you talked a little bit about some of your offerings at the Salome Institute, and I wonder if you'd like to talk about that, and then maybe segue into a little what you see for going forward in the future, what you're going to be working on.
That's a great question. What am I going to be working on? What I am doing now is, as I've said, running this year-round program, which we've been having a lot of fun. It's a beautiful community of people who like having conversations like this and exploring dreams and wondering about synchronicity and questions of the shadow and persona and all of these themes in Jungian psychology. So in that program, I have people who are very curious about this material, and I also have clinicians, people who are psychotherapists or psychologists who work with clients who want to incorporate Jungian psychology more into their work. And so it's a great community of folks, and we're opening up registration probably sometime in early March of next year for the new round of the new year.
Okay.
And I have a Substack, which also has a small or a beautiful community, but we do just monthly gatherings, and that's where we're studying the Red Book, Carl Jung's Red Book right now. My Substack is called Self and Society, and it's at Satya Doyle Byock .substack.com, as you've said. And finally, again, I have this book that I wrote, Quarterlife, The Search for Self in Early Adulthood, that came out a few years ago. And I hope that it's a very readable, accessible book. I call it Jungian light because I tried not to do too many quotes and too much theory, but it's an opportunity to kind of have more of a soul psychology conversation about this stage of life, and one that's less about get it together, get on your rocket ship. I don't find any of that terribly helpful.
Totally. I get that. And then you also have a podcast about the Red Book. Is that right? With a certain number of episodes?
Yes, we recorded that during the pandemic. So it's, I don't know, it's what, 5-6 years old now. But yes, it's a 30 episode podcast on Carl Jung's Red Book. We went through it pretty much chapter by chapter with a community of folks during the pandemic. We had free salons. We called them Salome salons at the time. And it was a beautiful community of folks who gathered every Sunday to study Jung's Red Book during the pandemic. And then beyond, post-vaccine, we kept gathering until we were done.
Oh, I love it. Satya Doyle Byock, it's so great to have you on the show. This is a fabulous conversation. And I wonder, I'm going to give you the last word here. Do you have any final words of encouragement for our listeners?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I love that you have this incredible podcast and community, Katherine. What a great undertaking to have a weekly program exploring dreams and these themes. So I will just send love to your listeners. It's what we need, right?
We do. We totally need that. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you all for listening. The Dream Journal is produced at the studios of KSQD in Santa Cruz. We are live every Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific at ksqd.org. I am Katherine Bell. You can contact me at experientialdreamwork.com or at Katherine@ksqd.org. That's Katherine with a K. Keep up with the shows on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and especially on YouTube by following at Experiential Dreamwork. I'd like to thank Rick Kleffel, engineer and music creator, audio editing by Suki Wessling, phones by Eric Nelson. Intro and outro pieces are both by Mood Science. And tomorrow morning, when you wake up, take a minute to write down your dream and bring it to the next Dream Journal.
There's a